Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode number 2 of the Stun Talk podcast. My name is Ben, and today I am joined by the one and only Victor Cunha, CEO of Curo. Hi, Vic. Thank you
Hello.
so much
Absolute pleasure. Thank
for
you.
joining me today. Um, First of all, would you mind introducing yourself and maybe who you are and what you do in life?
Sure. Well, I'm Victor de Cunha. If you want to say it in Portuguese, it's Vitor de Cunha.
Oh,
So there you go. That's your own word for that. Vitor de Cunha. I've been in this country in the UK since I was 5. I'm 58. So you can see I've got a very broad Portuguese accent as a result. And I live most of my time in London with my family. Well, actually, I say most, but probably part of my life, because most of my life I spend and have spent at Cura for the last 13 years now, Cura Student Exec, where I have got the fabulous honour well, being accountable for the organisation's performance, an organisation that's driven on purpose and a purpose that resonates with my why. That's why I love it.
yeah.
Never have to work. And we provide housing, hopefully good quality housing. I know we've got some places that need more work for people that might otherwise not be able to afford it.
Yeah, that's such a great little run through. It's like you've always practiced it.
It's just part of me. That's the thing. It's just every part of me is all about social housing, what we do.
Wow, and I think instantly that passion comes straight across, which I suppose is so important when you are actually
Yeah.
in charge of anything, right?
Yeah. I mean, even your life.
Yeah, true. I wanted just as an intro question of asking, how are you? And not just that, how are you? Things all right? Like, how are you? How is life at the moment?
Life is, for me, I was born an optimist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I look at life always with a slight degree of naive optimism. You know, life is good because I know I count my blessings. You know, I genuinely do. I feel very fortunate to live in a loving family, in a job I love with people genuinely appear to love me, and so I spend my time in environments generally where I feel of value, and so for me that fulfills me. It's like, this is good, this is and so, you know, as you get older you get more aches and pains. You come to realize that you know, you're not as fit, or you've got this or whatever, but you always have to realize that, I certainly do, that you should always be counting your blessings for the things that give you a sense of purpose. And so for me, you know, I've just become a granddad, you know.
Wow.
So you know, Sophia's 14 months, and it gives you, it's another stage in life to give you another perspective in life, and it's just another thing to be grateful for. So I'm in a really good place. I feel well. I know I'm in a great environment, and I feel a sense of fulfillment. So as long as that carries on, even when I feel a bit miserable because I got a cold or whatever, I generally will always say to people, I'm in a good place.
Great, thank you so much for just knowing. That is so nice to actually hear, and it's so nice to have that positive influence on things. Do you feel like that carries a lot of what you do in life, that positive outlook and reinforcement, I suppose?
Yeah, I think that, as I say, there is part of this which is, I think, genetic, isn't it? I think genetically I'm predisposed, I guess, to seeing the world in a particular way, and that's always been a feature of the way I see life. It makes me who I am. You know, that sort of demeanor of, sometimes, as I say, almost sort of naive optimism, means that I came from a reasonably humble background, right? We emigrated to this country. My mum and dad before my sister and I joined them a year after they'd come over. We didn't have a great deal, and then you know, we certainly didn't have Sky, as Rishi says, which, you know, was it this morning? He was denied Sky, so he was very poor.
Wow.
So, you know,
The benchmark.
like exactly, you know, it was for me. You know, you come into a world where stuff is it's difficult. It's not you just don't get it. You have to earn. You work hard for it, and so you build a resilience because, you know, things are hard. You got just stuff is hard. You know, I couldn't speak the language, which for most people just sounds really ridiculous. But if you're 5 years old, you come into school, but every kid is speaking another language. It's quite a big deal. But as a kid, you just get on with it. Kids don't have the problem with resilience. So I think resilience was built into me early on. And then, you know, I went to a lousy primary school. It's terrible secondary school. I often remark that it's one of those schools that they used to frisk you in the morning, and if you didn't have a weapon, they'd give you one just to make sure it was even. It was a really bad school. Both boys school in South London. It was so bad they closed it down. It was really, really bad. But despite that, I sort of found a way of always doing okay. You know, I'd sort of found a way of passing my O levels at the time, which is like the
A levels, or
well, no, the A levels were after the O levels. So you had O levels,
GCSE equipment.
GCSE, and then so I did well because no one was expected to get anything. The fact I got them, the teacher was like, "Wow, someone's got some results." Amazing. And then that meant I went to do some A levels, and I then flunked those because I decided that going out drinking with my mates was far more entertaining. Which, can I tell you, is not a good idea because you just have to then work whilst you're working. So I then left school having failed my A levels. Not that I could have gone to university because mum and dad didn't have the money for it, but went to school. Went to work and then had to go to college and then university to get my
What was the first job?
So my first job I applied for, because I had to get any job, was working for London Underground.
Cool.
And I applied for an apprenticeship in London Underground, not knowing what it was, which is, by the way, part of the answer to your question, which is this born optimist and it'll be fine. I just saw London Underground for they're a reasonable organisation.
What could go
That's
wrong?
an apprenticeship. Oh, that's it. And it turned out to be in the lift and escalator engineers department, where they were amazing. They gave me 8 years of training. I did an ONC in engineering, an HNC in engineering, a CMS, a certificate management. So by the time I'd done 8 years, and a DMS, diploma in management. So in 8 years, I'd gone to college for 8 years.
Wow.
They paid for the whole lot. And so by the time I got to that position of having a reasonable amount of qualifications after 8 years, I decided I started to use my a metaphor of my body and my brain is a motorcycle, and I don't know how fast I can get it to go. So how big is this engine? And I didn't know, so I would go, well, I'm going to try that.
Try and test it.
I'm going to test how much. So then I'd come to realise that the underground was hierarchical in nature, and that in order to progress beyond a certain point, you had to go to a certain university, actually more like military regiments. So Royal Engineers tended to be at the time senior people in the underground. London Underground still believed they were an engineering company, which was fascinating.
Okay. And
then towards the end of my time at the underground, the then person in charge of it, I don't know if it was called the chief exec. I don't think it was called the chief exec, but whoever ran it decided to have this thing called a company plan, because at the first time London Underground had been really challenged financially to find savings, and he had this bold idea, which was, we're going to refocus our energy on our core purpose, which is, drum roll, mass transit, moving people from one place to another. We are a customer service organisation. Honestly, it was revolutionary. All these people that only come to work to put in permanent way and to fix trains and to build lifts and escalators. I have never once thought that actually involved in all of this was the person you were moving from one place to the other. Massive. So I came to realise that because I wanted to see how big my engine was, how fast I could go, how much more I could do. I had ambitions that could never be met in an organization that didn't see me as part of them. You know, I didn't go to the right schools, I didn't go to the right regiments, but I saw that as an obstacle. I didn't see that as a ceiling. I saw it as a challenge to get around.
So it's more of a hurdle
that I had to get, and that goes back to this point around constantly trying to test how much I can do. Because I didn't have anything, so I had not a lot to lose at that point. You know, why wouldn't I go for it? And then I applied for the first job I ever saw. This is the second time now, so you heard it in London Underground. That was the first job I applied for and got. And
by this point, you've done what?
I've done 8 years.
8 years, yeah.
And so I left school when it was at 18, so 26 or so. I came out of London Underground's Oxford Circus house on Oxford Circus. We had a brilliant office, and there was a man selling the big issue, and I needed something to read on the Underground. So I bought the big issue, and I promptly started reading it. And on the back page, there was a job, and it said, General Manager wanted. I said, I've done my DMS, Diploma in Management. That's got the Cunha written all over it. So I then applied for this job and ended up shortlisted for Area Director of Housing at Brent Council. And the reason why it was called a General Manager's job advertised with no logos, because at the time, Brent Council was seen as a loony left council that no one wanted to work for. It had a terrible brand reputation at the time. So they wanted to hide the name. Anyway, I turned up at the housing department and was asked a series of questions, which I have no idea what I said. But it must have been okay because they offered me the job.
And this is the second interview you've ever had.
Yeah, my second interview. And so, yeah, there I was, working for London Underground, area housing director. I didn't even know what a void was. Never heard of a void. And the only thing I ever said in my interview that I still remember to this day was customer, 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 all the way through it, just customer. And I think that was probably what was the USP in the Cuna, because no one ever talked to customers at the Underground, and no one talked to customers at Brent Council. So I had 4 fantastic years. It was probably in my career the most intense learning period, because they had a chief exec called Charles Wood. And Charles was a bit of a maverick, revolutionary approach to leadership. And what he decided to do was devolve everything to its lowest possible level. So he said, if you ran a department, it was a trading division. And your job was to service the customer. And there was a contract between the council and your department. And it had a service level agreement with what you needed to achieve. And they gave you a check at the end of the month. And you had to deliver that service level to customers for that fee, however you wanted. You could use it all on salaries. You could use it all on IT. Entirely up to you. You just had to produce a business plan, and you would then deliver your business plan, and you were held accountable for something called the Brent Business Board. It was the most revolutionary model I'd ever seen. To this day, I don't think it's ever been implemented. But the point being, personally, hugely rewarding, because I learned loads. I had to learn about marketing, HR, and I thought, I'm going to do a master's degree here. So I did a master's degree, and it was brilliant timing, because then I was doing both at the same time. I then spent 4 years there, got my master's degree, lost my job because it was a 4-year fixed term contract, which is another interesting thing, because you were required to compete for your jobs against the private sector. It was a period of time in which the government introduced this thing called CCT, compulsive competitive tendering, and all local authorities had to compete with a private sector alternative. you either sank or swam. As it so happens, my Division 1 against the private sector, we won the contract for the areas that I ran. But they decided to merge all of the successful teams that won. So I ran 3 areas, but there was like 7 or 8. And I didn't get the main job, which the run a whole lot. So I then applied for another job, and you're going to think this is strange. I then got that one, and I'm not bragging this. I think it's just pure coincidence and a bit of luck. I ended up as Director of Resident Services at East Thames Housing Group. So I moved from being sort of manager in a local authority to a director of a East London Housing Association, and I then had 13 fantastic years.
Wow.
I loved it. And that's really where I earned my spurs on leadership of larger organisation in one of the most deprived parts of the country. And it was a brilliant time. We had a fantastic bunch of people, some of the most diverse and most talented humans I'd ever met, that I'm still friends with now. I still actually went on a soul weekender with them 2 weeks ago.
No way. Wow.
Yeah. There's about 7 of us that still are friends from that period. One of the legacies is we go soul weekends together. Men of a certain age going to dance to soul music and the 70s, and anyway, it's brilliant. And throughout that journey, it's always been a relentless search to see how big this engine is, and so this genuinely sort of naive belief that I can have a go at most things. Yeah. Worst case scenarios, I won't do it properly, and I'll move on. But so far, it's worked okay. And then 13 years ago, now this is an interesting one. I did apply for more than chief execs whilst at East Thames, but this is a big but. I applied for what was this organization's predecessor called Summer Community Housing, and didn't get it. I didn't get the job. And so I came for the interview, had the interview, and I just got my first and only ever brand new car. I don't know why I did it. I'd never do it again. But I'd actually bothered to go to a bank, borrow money, and buy a brand new car. Mad thing to do.
Yeah.
Parked it, went to my interview, came out, and some lovely human being in Bath had smashed it.
No.
Smashed it. And I had no rear screen. Completely smashed in. So I came.
How many days did you have the car at this point?
About a week.
Jeez.
A week. And I came from the interview and I went to the car park. It was completely smashed. And I looked up and the interview panel was looking down at me, presumably because there was a break. And I went like that. And it was like an advert. The sky's open and it started pouring rain. And I had to call the RAC because the car was new. You get free RAC cover. And it took me from Bath to East London, where I lived, with water pouring into the back of the car. But the worst thing was when I got to London, I got a phone call saying I didn't get the job.
And you just like, what is the point?
That was like not one of the best days.
Yeah.
Anyway, a year or so later, the successful person in that round had decided they didn't want the role. So they re-advertised. So I went for it again. This time I got it.
Why did you go again?
Because I'm a naive optimist.
Okay.
And look, I think there was stuff that I read and stuff I saw that drew me to the role and to the organisation. And I'm not a quitter. So I went for it again, and thankfully this time I got it. So that was 13 years ago. Now there are other people that can comment on my legacy today, but the same thing continues to drive me, which is this relentless belief that I'll keep revving up this engine and seeing how fast.
To us, this engine that's constantly running.
Yeah.
What's next in the thing?
I
Have I got that far yet?
don't know. I think that I'd like to think we're all unfinished business. Maybe I'll keep revving the engine forever. maybe it never conk out. Maybe it will just get to a particular speed and will always run at that point. But for now, I'll keep pushing myself. I've always thought that there's always something else you can do to learn. And for me, part of life is about learning. It's about that little butterfly in your stomach. You know, that little butterfly people think is fear. I often think it's just the excitement of the unknown. Because my sister is, I get a lot from my sister. She's a very wise human being, and she often gives me, because she's a psychologist, she'll give me some sort of thoughts, some way to frame things, and she'll say, she said, the same chemicals race from around your body that make you feel scared or make you feel joyous. It's the same, just how your body reacts to the same chemicals. So for me, the butterfly, very often people go, oh, don't you get worried to go on stage? Of course I do. I get butterflies like everyone else. But I choose to use that as an excitement, as an alternative to fear. But I get the same chemical reactions as everyone else. And so to your question about I really don't know. I'm going to keep pushing myself to see what else I can do, to see what else I can learn, what value I can create in this world. And I'll keep doing it until I can't do it. And I'll do that professionally, and I'll try and do that as best I can as a friend, a parent, as a partner, as someone's son. You know, in all aspects of life, I'll try and as best I can to be the better version of me as I can. I'm also not brilliant at everything, nor perfect. So the truth is, we're all work in progress. So I'll carry on.
That is honestly just so, I think, encouraging to hear. And hopefully anyone that's listening to this right now can actually take something away just from that alone. I feel like we're barely into this, and already I'm like, oh, it's just that positive outlook, isn't it? Like, and turning that dark day into a day which is actually a lesson, as opposed to a day that was so awful, or just trying to, I was going to say, like, to do a reverse it, to take that day where you're just like, oh man, that job interview was awful and I didn't get the job or whatever, but I'm going to go again.
Yeah. And I think, look, the reality is I fast forwarded a load of milestone events that signified a change in my life. There were lots of days that were bad along the way. There were things that didn't go well. I think the part of life, the older you get, the more you realize that by implication they will happen as much as, if not more than, the good days. So understanding that's what will be unfolding, and recognizing it for what it is, but also recognizing the moments of joy, celebrating them, understanding that you go, right, I'm here, nothing hurts, let's go. It's as important as being upset if your team's lost, or something bad's happened at work that you didn't want to happen. I think that's the important thing, is putting stuff into context. We did some learning at Curo a few years back, which probably ought to dust down and redo, and part of that was all about mindset and about how we see the world and how we frame things at work. And I took a lot of stuff away from that learning, not least that we should only ever focus on the things that we can influence and control. Everything else, and it's easier said than done, you should just let go of. And so for me, if I'm clear about what I can influence and what I control, then I can put everything else in a box. And I'm pretty lucky, because my sister said to me, not everyone can do that. There's some people that struggle to put things in boxes and say, right, I'll come back to it. I was born in a way, or at least my upbringing has allowed me to say, I can't deal with that right now. I'm going to put it here for now. I'll come back to it. But equally, put it in a box when I can't influence it, or I can't control it. There's a lot of madness going on in this world. You could drive yourself to despair just thinking about the world we're currently operating in, or you can say, I can make influence in changing things around me. And we're lucky we do jobs that really do change people's lives for the better. Why don't we just focus on that? Why don't we say, that's not great, but there's nothing I can do about it. And so I take, that's how I try and deal with things. Can I influence it? Can I control it? Should I accept that whatever's just happened has happened and I can learn from it, or I can't learn from it? If I can learn from it, tuck it away as a learn. If not, stuff happens. Stuff happens. But it's easier said than done. But look, one of the things I did reasonably early on in doing that all that learning stuff, whether it's a postgrad or the masters, was part of those formal training things is they make you do a bit which is about understanding yourself. So they make you spend the first part of any structured learning where it's academically based is like, yeah, but you need to understand you first. Right? You can't be learning other people's stuff if you don't understand yourself. So part of what I understand is this: as I talk to you now, I am expressing my feelings through that conversation. Some people internalize it. They reflect, comes out beautifully, well articulated, thought out. For me, I know I express myself because that makes me understand what I believe to be true. Yeah, I process externally, but that took me a while to understand. And it took me a while to say to my colleagues, I'm just saying this out loud. It's not instruction. It's not a new policy. It's talking out loud. But understanding yourself is really important, because if you understand that that's how you process, or that's how you understand the world or rationalize the world, allows you also to make adjustments. Like say to people, by the way, this is not a new policy. I am now talking out loud. It's an adjustment for the world, because otherwise you're restricted in the way that you naturally think and behave. And one of the most important things I think about working at Curo is that we all should celebrate our difference. It should all be fanning the flames of difference, because it's that difference that makes us so special as people, but more importantly, makes us better decision makers. Do you know what I mean? I know that if I can encourage people to bring their true selves to work, to be who they are, whether that's with all our broken bits, right? That makes us a better organization. So if I can encourage people to be authentic, to express who they really are, to explain how they see the world and what they need in order for that to be an environment that gives them a sense of fulfillment, and they're able to thrive. That's got to be the world we got to create, isn't it? Together.
Completely.
So, that's how I try and do. I try and make sure that I control and influence things if I can, if I can't let go. But equally, some of my best successes are the failures that I've had, because they've all come to make me the person I am today.
And I think what's really interesting, as you were kind of speaking, I was reflecting on my own journey of getting to know myself, and I would say kind of the exact same thing. Once I figured out who Ben is and what makes Ben happy and why do I do the things I do, that was the moment in life where I felt like I really started to move forwards. At what age would you say that kind of happened to you? Because for me, that's been in the last 3 years.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm 31, so it's probably 28, 29 now I started to figure it out.
I think probably because I went through a lot of formal learning after school, and it was a requirement, formal learning, whether it was the sort of the HND or the master's degree. That was a structured learning thing that I probably in early 20s, mid 20s, whenever that sort of activity, so that became much more constant thing for me. I don't know if it's a thing that normal people would just fall onto without a wise counsel. In this case, it was a learning program structure. Some people have got coaches, but I certainly fell across it because it was something that I was encouraged through studies to do in the mid-20s. Other people get it because they got a good friend and say, have you ever thought of? But I know it's played a huge part in me. Often people compliment because they see me as down to earth. I've never seen it more than just being who I am. If nothing else, because I don't want to mislead you. I don't want you to be let down believing I'm someone else. And so if people see that as a positive, fantastic, but I can't be anyone else. I remember getting coaching from a senior coach, executive coach, who's given me all sorts of advice, which was, quite frankly, characterize yourself on someone else. And it was the sort of archetypal sort of executive that would normally get jobs. And I was like, I was listening to it, I was thinking, I can't do that. I'm very happy being me. So if I'm not going to be chief exec, or I'm not going to be a director of a company, that's a price worth paying. So I've always tried to sort of not
stay true to yourself.
Yes. I don't, and I don't sound like a normal chief exec, probably. I probably don't behave like a normal chief exec, if there's a normal chief exec. But certainly, let's say
stereotype, right?
Yeah. I come from a very different background to most. I certainly probably speak very differently. I have a different lived experience to many. But I'm very comfortable in this skin. I'm very happy with it. And, I'm doing stuff I love. So, my sense is, for me, discovering this Victor, and working on him, since that time, is not only, the best for me, because I don't have to do anything other than just work on this. I don't have to work with something else. But I also know that if you work hard enough at it, there'll always be something. If you're prepared to listen, there's always something to work on.
And I think, so as you were speaking, you obviously said about having people who kind of know you and people you can kind of reflect on. What if someone maybe doesn't have that avenue to maybe have someone to coach or to go towards it? How would someone learn who they are without that kind of external process? Do you think that is possible?
Look, there are some people that are reflectors. They could read a book and reflect. It's difficult for me to put myself into someone else's shoes, because I see the world, very, very much from my perspective. But I think that I'd be surprised if no one or anyone in this world wouldn't have value from having someone who they can have a safe conversation with around things that they want to explore, and they want to bounce ideas from. Very often a good coach won't even tell you any answers, they'll just ask you more questions. They ask you more questions, and you'll come to your own answers.
Oh, that's why I do that.
I think for me, I've always had a coach, since those early days of being at college, where they tell you, whether it's your teacher, that you're in this case someone who's running the course, or then subsequently, all 13 years I've been at Curo, I've always had an exec coach, always. And I always encourage all of my direct reports to have an exec coach, and that's because when you have a role where it's very difficult to go and ask someone for advice, you need to be able to talk to someone in the same environment. But from a professional perspective, or even an emotional perspective, that has to have a read across, doesn't it? I think everyone ought to have one, whether that's a best friend that can give them honest feedback, or someone who's a professional. That is something I personally think that we all should have to go to. and that we should have the courage to seek out.
Because feedback can be really hard, right?
Absolutely.
But it's also the thing that helps us to grow and to learn, and fundamentally it's to help. And I think it's that people, what I've seen from my own experience, when they get feedback they don't like, and sometimes when you put that, the fur goes up and no, that's not me. But actually feedback, if it's coming from the right place, which I think is one of the most important things, as long as feedback's coming from the right place, which is to help and to grow, that can be one of the most important things we can get. But it's actually choosing to accept it and to learn and question, why is that person saying that to me, and what's the reasoning behind it, right?
Yeah, but I also think it's a journey you're on. I think that you can't start there. I think you get to a point of maturity that allows you to go into places that are uncomfortable. But the idea is like a muscle you're exercising. You take feedback by recognizing feedback's given with no malice intended. And you do that in areas that are less sensitive, but will add value. And in time, when you see that there is a actual benefit to you, then you can start, I think, pushing out how far you're prepared to be vulnerable. Because people won't necessarily be vulnerable from day one, will they? So they'll show you what they want you to see.
Yes.
And in time, as you get to know people a bit better, you see a bit more of them.
And you slowly get to see their true self. Right?
Exactly. So I do think, though, you need to see feedback as a muscle that you're exercising, and that only through regular exercise can you really get the benefit of it. You know,
like any muscle
at all. But I don't think, if you're genuinely on a journey of self-discovery about who you are, what really drives you, what gives you a sense of real fulfillment, you have to be prepared to listen and respond to feedback. But you also have to be prepared to be vulnerable, to explain how you feel, what are the issues that you're struggling with. That's actually quite a big deal to start to do.
Yeah.
And it's probably what most people struggle with, because there's sort of I'm a hot-blooded South European, where we wear our hearts on our sleeves, and we we hug each other and tell each other we love each other all the time. But I think that there is a cultural thing here. You can see that some people struggle much more to be expressive and open about their feelings than others. But I genuinely believe that this is, if you want to go on that journey of personal development, you have to embrace that. You genuinely have to embrace it.
And to change the subject a little bit, I was really drawn on what you were saying about that kind of stereotype of the CEO. And I think it's really interesting, because you've gone from probably one stereotyped, stigma, centralized social housing tenant. I also grew up in social housing myself, to now being the CEO, which also carries a very different stigma, right? Like you've already said, I'm not the standard.
Yeah.
How do you deal with the stigma? Because I really hope there's people that listen to this who might be in social housing, or I think every position or where you live, it will be stigmatized to some way. But I know we have stigmatization around social housing and the elite CEOs, people in power. How do you deal with that stigma and your identity against that, I suppose?
I don't know if I've ever processed it that way. I do recognise, though, that when my mum and dad came to social housing in the 70s, 1/3 of all homes in this country were owned by the state.
Wow.
Yeah, 32% of all housing was owned by the state, local authority housing, and it was housing for the working poor, and it just simply meant that people that were on lower incomes that couldn't access the private market, whether to buy or rent, had a place to call home, a subsidised place to call home, and that was actually quite a norm. Quite a large part of society relied on that public infrastructure. And then you fast forward to today, where just under 17% of all homes are publicly owned through housing and social local authorities. So we've got about half of the genuinely affordable rented homes left in this country. And two things happen as a result. First, you have the chronic consequences of that: kids living in temporary accommodation, families that are overcrowded, people living in the streets. So the excesses of, I guess, the social consequences of a lack of public infrastructure, in this case housing. And the other thing is you ration what you have because there's less of it. And because there's less of it, the rationing is done by need, but not just need, super need. There are people employed in local authorities who have an unenviable task of deciding whether a woman fleeing domestic violence is more worthy than a home than someone in a wheelchair. That's where the system has got to. These people all need a home. Everyone. A home is a basic life. You should expect to have a home, and in this country we don't. So I think what's happened is, as a result of that, particularly some of the right-wing press have focused on social housing as some sort of house of last resort, where it's not. It's a house for every single person that is denied housing through the market, and it uses extreme examples of poor behaviour or poor quality housing to define a precious thing, which is affordable housing in this country. So I'm personally insulted. I'm personally insulted because I work in the sector. I'm personally insulted because I grew up in the sector, and I know it not to be true. So for me, the stigma doesn't come about me being chief executive. The stigma comes from recognizing that the system that's effectively broken has been deliberately dismantled for a very long time, and very cleverly repackaged as a message to most voters as this is the problem, not this is the solution. This is a problem because of the way we've characterized the people and the lack of investment in that. So for me, I am motivated by changing the narrative, by putting the other side, which is we have people in social housing that aren't just chief executive housing associations. They've gone on to be amazing athletes, amazing politicians, amazing film stars, people that have had enormous benefit to society. It's been a springboard to hundreds and millions of people in this country for the better. And it's that story that needs to come out. It's our job, I think, to give airtime to the positiveness of it, but it's also our job to promote social housing as a genuine alternative, forcing people to buy homes they can't afford when they bought it, or rent properties that are taken away 50-60% of their earning. It's an unsustainable model. So for me, I'm motivated by trying to change that narrative, by changing the construct. So when you were asked what's next on the motor, pushing that motorbike, my answer is, how do I change that? How do I go from just trying to support colleagues here and the residents who serve to try and make a change in the construct of the model? How do we build more affordable homes in this country, the ones that people need? How do we make sure that the sector is seen as a genuine part of the crown jewels of social services in this country, rather than how it's sometimes portrayed in the press as a problem?
Yeah, which it isn't. Wow. Thank you so much for just sharing that with so much honesty and passion. It's so encouraging to speak to someone who is in a position who can hopefully try to help influence some change, but with just such passion, because I think it's so easy to just presume that no one cares. Like I watched the debates last week, and I was like, geez, these are just, then there's no answers here, and I think it's so easy to presume that people who are at the top just are just trying to do things for power, right? And just trying to, and it's so encouraging to actually hear that passion and that honesty and that drive to want to create change. And for me, I feel that every day when I come to work. And the whole reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you is because I know that this comes from the top, that we try to create change, we try to create homes for good, and it's not just a catchphrase. Like, how do you embed that positivity and that change and Vic into Curo? Because this is, I'm not saying it's your baby, but
I've been here a while now.
you've been here a while, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do
You tell me whether you think it's embedded. I always think that one of the things that my job is about is to role model the values of the organization and to try and articulate why it's important, why we're doing stuff, why it matters, and encourage a sense of real belonging in that purpose. You'll know more than me whether that lands, but I know that that's a sort of relentless task that I try and work on all the time. And in my darker days, I often wonder whether I'm being successful, because there's a lot of people now, 770 colleagues. I can't be everywhere. I rely on other people having the same values, the same motives, the same drive, the same passion. But you never know, do you? But you hope through the energy and the belief and the constant, hopefully, reinforcement of things that matter, that we get the majority of colleagues always do the right thing. And you said a really important word for me, which is I care, and Cura means I care in Latin. It's one of our values. And I often say to people on their first day at work at Curo, when I go to the inductions, if this stuff doesn't matter to you, if you don't care about it, I beg you to keep looking until it does. Yeah. Because caring for what you do, whether it's at home or at work, means that when you have a bad day, when things go wrong, it can all be put into context because it really matters to you. And I think for me, what drives me is I care about this stuff. I care about what we do. I care about our colleagues. And so, all I can do is constantly try and make that a thing that people experience all the time when they're with me. The extent to which I am, penetrating through the 770, I don't know. Hopefully, more than I don't.
Something which my mind's kind of drifting onto is you obviously spend a lot of time here, but you don't live here. The office isn't your home. You've got wife, kids, all back in London.
Yeah.
How do you manage that relationship and relationships with and your parents and everything else? Like, how do you live in one place and work somewhere else and go back and forth and manage that relationship and your mental health with all of that? Because that must be tough, right? Because you're also then coming here with a very important job.
Yeah.
And you've got a lot on your plate.
Yeah.
How
I wouldn't have done that unless so I've been here 13 years, and so my eldest is 33, so Daniel is 33, so he would have been 20, Amber's 28, so she was a bit younger. But I wouldn't have done it if the kids had been any younger. That's the first thing. I think it had to be at the right time in my career. Secondly, when I came here, this thing mad, which is I actually remortgaged and got myself a 1-bedroom place so that I had a place that was mine.
Yeah.
It's not for the faint-hearted, remortgaging for that, but I just felt that I couldn't live out of a box in a hotel. And so I ended up taking that risk, but the return was I had a place called home here that my wife could come to. And, you know, the first few couple of years were the toughest because I had no network, no friends. So you end up in those first few years, certainly for me, having extra effort of creating friendships, and new friendships.
Yeah.
But once you establish a pattern, so, you know, early days I was here 5 days a week. Now our post-pandemic is 3 days a week. So it's quite tough being lonely.
Yeah.
But friendships played a massive part of it. And then you fall into a pattern of finding your way of having effectively life split across 2 cities, where your wife has to come here a bit, and you go home at the weekends mostly, and you find a rhythm in that. But it's all about how you keep, in this case, how you keep your mental well-being right, because you can't work 24 hours a day. You need to stop, and you need to be able to relax and have fun, have a social network, and in the end, that's how I found solution. Just creating a separate network of friends, and also having to accept that some of my family would have to come here, some of my friends from London would come here and see me, and that's 13 years later, and I found the rhythm,
Found the balance.
I found the rhythm. But it, you know, the first few years, you have to. It can be disorientating.
Yeah.
You have to rebuild a new life in that sense. So it's not without. It wasn't without struggle. Yeah.
How did you, like, when you were having that loneliness?
Yeah.
How did you combat that? Because it's so easy to just, like, when you're feeling lonely, it's so easy just to get sucked in because you're like, I'm alone.
Yeah.
Right? How did you?
Well, I did work long hours. I mean, that's also true. So they were very long hours. But I'm Portuguese, and I'm dual nationality actually, but I'm very proud heritage of Portuguese. So there was a Portuguese restaurant in the city, and so I just made an effort to go and eat there regularly, and then became friendly with the owner. And then from there on, set up a relationship with not just him, but his friends network. And then I found that I was able to socialize in the evening after work as well, which made a massive difference. So life wasn't just simply work. After a while, there was life in it. Going to the theatre, going to the cinema, going for drinks with friends after work. Made a massive difference. I'm a big extrovert. Being at home watching telly would not have done for me. Although I don't get me wrong, I don't mind.
I do it sometimes.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I do quite sometimes enjoy my own company. But generally speaking, it was getting out, making an effort to connect through whatever networks you've got. And for mine, it was the Portuguese community. Things that are easier for you. And then from there on in, re-establishing some sort of life that isn't work dominated.
Yeah, that sounds like you got on top of that quite quickly. And
yeah, because I couldn't pace up and down a 1-bedroom flat at the time.
There's only so many times.
There's only so many times you can walk around in front of the room. Yeah.
And I wonder, like, as you're obviously talking about like your own mental health, like, I mean, I don't know if you see it as this, but obviously you have 773 employees, was it?
Something in that way, yeah.
All underneath you. Like, do you feel responsibility for their mental health and their well-being as well, or how do you see the rest of your colleagues?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, the short answer, I don't see my responsibility to be anyone's parent.
No.
And worry about how they are, feeling or physically. I don't see that as my role. I think how I see my role is to set the conditions for people, and to make sure those conditions allow them to be the best they can be. So
and to be themselves,
and so I often say, I say every single induction, which is I will talk about the values and I can live those values, but they are not my values. All I can do is demonstrate what they mean in practice, and ask you to hold me to account for whenever you see me, because I am human, do something that's silly, that's not consistent, because that's feedback I can work on, right? But all of us are part of an ecosystem. We're all adults. We all have a responsibility to participate in that values, and we can either be silent when we see something that's bad, or we can be the person that gives feedback when things need to change. And I often say to people at the colleagues induction that if there is nothing they remember, please remember this statement, which is an organizational culture is defined by the worst behavior it will tolerate. Not by the best, but by the worst behavior it tolerate. My job is not to be everywhere to spot and try and change bad behavior. It's all of our jobs. So I hope I provide an environment where I give permission for people to give feedback on our values, how they're being lived or how they're not being lived, and give people the opportunity to come to work with who they really are, and to have a real sense of belonging, to have a friend at work, to feel supported and loved, and get the best out of the day that's given them. That's all I can do. The way people then feel, I'd like to think that part of our environment, part of the conditions we set, is to have these sorts of debates. We say, like, come on, let's how are we going to support one another? Because we're all going through something. None of us are immune from going through something. It might be you today, it might be me tomorrow. There will be no day when all 700 come into work and we're all on top form. Because there'll always
be a great day for that happens,
but there'll always be someone at work that could do with a phone call or a how are you, a supportive conversation, always. And one day it'll be you. And that's the environment and the conditions I hope that I can support.
That's such an incredible answer. Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time, and probably that we're probably nearly up. So I just want to ask 2 final questions. First one, what's the dream? What's the dream? I think it's so important that everyone has a dream.
What my personal dream? Personal dream would be never to stop working. Right? I'd always want ever. I'd always want to feel like I'm adding value. In this case, through what I do, which is around giving people generally a home, somewhere to call home. So I'd always love to be able to do that, even if it's only a few days here and there. I never really stop. Whilst you're alive, I think you should be adding value. But personally, I'd love to be able to go and have a little place by the sea with my family, maybe, in the south of Portugal, maybe, where I could spend lots of unashamed time with my grandchildren. Maybe just in the spring and the early autumn. It's too hot in the summer. But for me, being able to do that and carry on making a difference in the world would be a great way to end it all.
That sounds like a really nice dream. Especially that those mid parts of the year. It's still hot in summer. And then my final question is, as part of Stubble Talk, my whole dream is about starting a conversation And so my question to you is, who are you going to go and start a conversation with after this?
That's a great question. Particularly on this topic. Interesting. I probably will ask Paul Harris because he's someone who would probably have a really good answer.
Yeah.
He'd have a really good response, I think.
Great. Well, make sure you do, because
I will.
It's an important thing, and we
I
will
will.
be talking. But thank you so much
Absolute
for
pleasure.
your time.
Thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts with you.
Honestly, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for listening or watching if you are watching. Please make sure you just give us a like, a share, a subscribe, and whatever else kind of happens on social media. And then we'll see you around.